Hey, Larry here, Acts 29 today. Coming to you from Sunny World headquarters in Chiang Mai, Thailand. I'd like to welcome all the viewers in Thailand and around the world to this edition. So today, right after the introduction to Life After Your Last Excuse, we're going to be starting out on this incredible journey that was prayed out in the Spirit and now was starting to be walked out. The first thing that happened was I had an opportunity to go to India, of all places, because that was actually the second trip that I had taken out of the country. 20 years before was India. And now I had an opportunity to go back, and it was almost 20 years to the day. So it was amazing to me that 20 years later, I would have an opportunity to go back to India. So I went with some friends that were involved in a man there who did a lot of ministry in the upcountry to places where nobody else really ever went or wanted to go. And he had an orphanage and some stuff going on in the small town that he lived in. And they'd been working with him for, I don't know, I think over a year or so. And so they invited me to go on the trip with them. So I went with them. We stayed a couple days in Singapore on the way and visited some friends. And then we ended up in Bombay, what do they call it now? Mumbai. So we went kind of into the central part of India, Andhra Pradesh, and we took a train. It was about a 20-hour train ride. Took longer to get to Andhra Pradesh from Bombay on the train than it did to get to Bombay from America on the plane. So this was a 20-hour train ride. Kind of interesting. These are old trains. And the tracks are on concrete pads instead of wooden pads with spikes driven in them. They're on concrete pads, and they're not connected real well, and in some places not at all. So the tracks move back and forth, maybe a foot or so. So you go around some corners, and then it feels like you're kind of gonna go sideways, and before it starts to straighten out. And they stopped at every village, and people run up to the windows to sell you food and drinks and all that kind of stuff. And so it was a very interesting and very long train ride. But we did get to this town, and we had brought some clothes and all kinds of different stuff for the people. Now, I'm going to talk to you a little bit too as I go through this about an education that I was getting in missions. You learn things along the way, and not all of them are real pretty or good. One of the things that we noticed right away was that when we put all the clothes out on the tables, this head guy and his entourage, of ministers with him, they came in the room first, and they were going through all these clothes, and they were starting to pick out the very best shirts and the very best everything for themselves. Well, we said, hey, you know what? That's not really right. That's not really good. We're servants, and these poor people should get the best first. So we just went in and said, hey, you know what? You guys need to wait till the last. And if there's anything left, you can have it. But we're going to give this out to the people first. because they're the ones that are in the greatest need. Well, they were a little taken back by that, but what could they do? So that's what we did. A lot of the ministry there was like crusade stuff. They would invite people from all over, and there'd be, oh, I don't know, there was hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people came to these meetings, and it was a huge event, a huge deal. And they'd do it at night, and they had fires going out around the perimeter of this meeting, and then they'd play this music, and then they'd announce us from America, and we'd come walking through. I mean, it was pretty bizarre. You kind of feel like a rock star going up on the stage with all these fires were burning and people's carrying on. And it was pretty wild. For me, I was 20. No, I was in my 40s then, but it was still pretty wild. But the ministry times were good. We preached the word, we give our testimonies, we prayed for the sick, and you had to pray for everyone. Nobody'd leave until you prayed for them personally, laid your hands on them. So it took hours and hours and hours and hours and hours, to do these meetings. But I was excited. It was good. I loved it. So there was a lot of that kind of ministry time. And I remember one night we were walking down this dusty road late at night, and there was a full moon, and so we were in the moonlight walking down this dusty road, and I'm halfway around the world, and I'm not in the truck anymore. And I'm just thinking, wow, how amazing is this, that the Holy Spirit got me out of that truck, just like he said he was going to do, and put me in the ministry and the place that I really belonged. And I was just so excited. Now, I will share with you some things that happened later in that ministry that, I don't like to talk about, but they're realities. And you got to be careful in mission ministry. And it's a really good idea if you can send somebody to the places you're supporting, and not for 2 weeks, but for 2 or 3 months, because then you'll begin to see what's really going on. And that way, you don't get taken to the cleaners in some of these places. So later on, a year or so later, after we got back home, this guy had written a book, and some lady gave him $10,000 to have all these books published that he could give out around, the country there. And so when those people went over to visit, he couldn't even show them a single book. Now if you write a book, paperback book, you're gonna keep some copies and give to the people that helped you and all of that. Well, he couldn't even show one single book. He couldn't even take them somewhere where he'd given somebody a book. And so these people got real suspicious about, where'd this 10 grand go? And they noticed that he was wearing some pretty fine clothes, had an entourage that kind of treated him like a king, and some people in the town had been talking about, travel and stuff he was doing. And so it became very apparent that there was no books, but, the money was going, more to his and his own. So there was a real issue there, a real problem. And I don't know, it was less than a year later, his wife and one of his daughters was killed in a car accident, and then he died like the next year in a car accident. And it was just terrible, and it was so sad. that, this kind of stuff happened. But I'm telling you, it happens. And so you need to be aware, you need to be careful, you need to do your due diligence when you're supporting missionaries in these different countries, because they don't think like we think in the West. And so you have to do your due diligence in this stuff. The next place that I went to not long after India was had an opportunity to go to Russia with some people that were taking Bibles to some soldiers there on a basis. This was shortly after the Iron Curtain fell, and so we were some of the first people to take thousands of Bibles in and just hand them out in the streets. But we also had an opportunity to hand them out at an army base where no U.S. people had ever been. Also, my dad went with me on this trip. We flew into Moscow, took a bus south 100 or so miles to a place called Obninsk, and then we were giving out Bibles to these soldiers and stuff, and they were so excited. Some of them got saved because it had been 70 years that they had been told they couldn't read this book. And so as we handed these Bibles out to the people on the streets, I got a picture here of me handing out. That bag is full of Bibles, and I'm just out on the street handing out Bibles there. And the amazing thing is that when you gave out the Bible there, they didn't just take the Bible and walk away. They took the Bible and went a few steps away and sat down and started reading it. And so you'd be out in this public square, and you didn't even have to walk around. The people came to you, and you were just handing them out as fast as you possibly could. And then they would just go sit down somewhere and start reading. So you'd have all these hundreds of people just sitting down in the square reading the Bible. It was amazing. It was really amazing, and I was very excited, to be a part of that and be able to be involved in that. And then it was my dad's, he'd been to the Philippines once on a mission trip when he was, years before. So this was his second time out of the country. So it was nice to be able to go on a trip with him and have that time together. So I'm going to continue on with this Russia trip in the next video and share some really good stuff. So I'll see you over there in the next one. God bless. Thanks for tuning in.